My son threw ice water in my face because I asked for a piece of bread. He wanted to impress his business partners at dinner, so he treated me like a stray dog. He didn't know that the water washed away the last ounce of my patience. 2 hours later, I emptied his bank accounts. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Italy, leaving him with nothing but his debts. But before I tell you how I destroyed his fake empire, hit that like button and subscribe if you believe respect goes both ways. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The humiliation didn't start with the water. It started with the smell of buttered lobster tail wafting across the mahogany table. My stomach growled a traitorous sound in the elegant dining room of the Westchester mansion I had purchased 3 years ago. At the head of the table sat my son Preston, wearing a $3,000 suit I knew he hadn't paid off yet. To his right was his wife Tiffany, glittering in diamond earrings that were technically mine. And around them sat 3 potential investors, men with slicked-back hair and hungry eyes, listening to Preston brag about his business acumen. I sat at the far end of the table, the spot usually reserved for children or unwanted guests. My plate was an insult. While everyone else feasted on surf and turf paired with a $200 bottle of Cabernet, I stared down at a small dry chicken breast and a handful of wilted iceberg lettuce. No dressing. Tiffany had told the kitchen staff that I had a sensitive stomach. It was a lie. She just didn't want to waste the grocery budget on me. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up my fork. I was 68 years old, a man who had once managed logistics for global shipping lanes, a man who had moved millions of dollars of freight across oceans. Now I was reduced to a silent prop in my son's theater of success. He needed me there to show he was a family man, a man who took care of his aging father. It was part of the pitch. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice raspy. The conversation didn't break. Preston was in the middle of a story about a deal he had closed in Tokyo, a deal I knew for a fact had fallen through because he had overslept for the conference call. "Preston," I said a little louder this time. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw tightening. The investors looked at me. Tiffany rolled her eyes, letting out a dramatic sigh that rustled her silk dress. "What is it?" "Dad," Preston asked, his tone dripping with that fake, patient sweetness he used when strangers were watching. "We are in the middle of business here." "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, eyeing the basket of warm, untouched sourdough bread in the center of the table. "Could I please have a piece of bread? I'm still a little hungry." The silence that followed was absolute. You would have thought I asked for the keys to the investors' cars. Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Oh, Harry," she cooed, her voice like poisoned honey. "You know carbs make you sluggish. We're just looking out for your health. You're already so forgetful lately." "I'm not forgetful, Tiffany," I said, my dignity flaring up for the first time in months. "I'm hungry. It's just a piece of bread." Preston's face turned a shade of red I recognized from his childhood tantrums. He stood up. The chair legs scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. He grabbed the crystal water goblet in front of him. It was full of ice water, condensation dripping down the sides. "You are embarrassing me," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You are always asking for more. More food, more heat, more attention. When will you realize you are a burden?" I looked him in the eye. I looked at the son I had adopted when he was barely walking. The boy I had put through private schools, the man whose failed startups I had quietly bailed out time and time again. "I am asking for bread in my own house, Preston," I said calmly. That was it. That was the trigger. The reminder that the deed to this house was in my name, held in a trust he controlled, but didn't own, snapped something inside him. He didn't want his investors to know he was a squatter in his father's wealth. "Wake up, old man," he shouted. He threw the water. It wasn't a splash. It was a deluge. The ice cubes hit my forehead with stinging force. The freezing water soaked my face, ran down my neck, and drenched the collar of the only decent shirt I had left. I gasped from the shock, the cold liquid blinding me for a second. The room went dead silent. One of the investors coughed into his napkin. Tiffany didn't look shocked. She looked satisfied. She looked at me with a sneer that said, "Finally, you know your place." Preston stood there, the empty goblet in his hand, chest heaving. "Go to your room," he commanded, pointing to the hallway like I was a misbehaving dog. "Get out of my sight before you ruin this deal completely." I didn't wipe my face. I let the water drip from my nose and chin. I wanted to remember the sensation. I wanted the cold to seep into my bones and freeze the part of my heart that still loved him. I stood up slowly. My knees didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I looked at the investors, then at Tiffany, and finally at my son. I didn't say a word. I didn't give him the satisfaction of an apology or a tear. I simply turned around and walked out of the dining room. As I walked down the long hallway toward the back of the house, I could hear Preston's voice returning to that jovial, fake tone. "So sorry about that, gentlemen. Dementia is a terrible thing. We do our best, but sometimes he gets aggressive. Aggressive." I touched the wall of the hallway. Venetian plaster. I had paid $12,000 for this finish. I passed the living room with the Italian leather sofa. $8,000. My money. I walked past the garage door where Preston's Porsche 911 was parked. Monthly lease payments of $2,000. My money. They thought I was a retired logistics manager with a dwindling pension. They thought the house and the cars were bought with the last of my savings and that I was now dry. They didn't know about the trust. They didn't know that I was the sole trustee and Preston was merely a conditional beneficiary. They didn't know that I had retained full control, allowing him access only as an authorized user, a privilege I could revoke with a single phone call. I entered my room. It wasn't the master suite. Preston and Tiffany had taken that the week they moved in to help me after my hip surgery. They had moved me into what used to be the storage room on the ground floor. It was small, drafty, and smelled of damp earth. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, the water still soaking into my shirt. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Absolute, terrifying clarity. For 3 years I had allowed this. I had played the role of the frail, dependent father because I wanted to believe that if I gave them enough, if I supported them enough, they would eventually step up. I wanted to believe that Preston would become the man I raised him to be. But the water on my face washed away that delusion. I stood up and locked the door. It was a flimsy lock, but it would buy me time. I knelt down and reached under the bed. I pulled out a dusty, beat-up leather suitcase. It was the same suitcase I used when I traveled to cargo ports in Singapore and Hamburg 30 years ago. Inside, tucked between the lining, was a key. I used it to open a small metal box I kept hidden in the back of the closet behind my old coats. Inside the box was not money, but something more valuable. A black notebook and a burner phone. An old Nokia brick that held a charge for a week. I sat on the floor and opened the notebook. Columns of numbers, account access codes, the contact information for Jameson, my lawyer and oldest friend. I turned on the phone. The screen glowed green in the dim room. My thumb hovered over the speed dial, but before I could press it, I heard footsteps in the hallway, then laughter. "Can you believe he asked for bread?" Tiffany's voice. It carried through the thin door. I thought I was going to die of embarrassment. "He's losing it," Preston replied. His voice was slurred. He was drinking the expensive scotch now. "I saw Dr. Baxter today. He's willing to sign the papers." My finger froze. "Really?" Tiffany asked. "How much?" 10 grand, Preston said. He signs the competency evaluation stating, "Dad has advanced dementia and cannot make financial decisions." Once that's filed, I get full power of attorney. We put him in that state facility off the highway, the cheap one. "But what about the house?" Tiffany asked. "We sell it," Preston said. We sell it all. We put him in the home, pay the monthly fee from his pension, and we cash out. I'm tired of waiting for him to die, Tiff. I need that capital now. The crypto market is crashing, and I need to cover those margin calls before the bank seizes the Porsche. I lowered the phone. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. They weren't just being cruel. They were plotting to erase me. They were going to strip me of my agency, lock me in a warehouse for the dying, and liquidate my life's work to pay for his gambling debts. I looked at the water stain on my shirt. It was starting to dry, leaving a stiff, cold patch on the fabric. $10,000 to a crooked doctor to end my life. That was what I was worth to him. I dialed Jameson's personal number. It was 11 at night, but I knew he would answer. He picked up on the second ring. Harry, is everything all right? Jameson's voice was sharp, alert. Execute Omega, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't recognize it myself. There was a pause on the line. Jameson knew what that meant. We had drafted the Omega Protocol 5 years ago, a nuclear option in case I ever lost mental capacity, or in this case if I decided my air was unfit. It was a scorched earth policy. Are you sure? Harry Jameson asked softly. Once we start this, the assets are frozen. The cards stop working. The access is revoked. There is no undo button. I looked at the door. I could hear them clinking glasses in the kitchen, toasting to my demise. He threw water in my face, Jameson, I said. And he's planning to commit me to a state facility by Friday using a bribed doctor. I want it all gone. Tonight. Understood, Jameson said. His tone shifted to pure business. I'm logging into the trust mainframe now. I'll revoke his signatory rights immediately. I'll flag the credit cards as stolen. I'll transfer the liquid assets to the offshore holding in the Cayman Islands. It will take me about an hour to propagate through the banking system. Do it, I said. And Jameson. Yes. Harry, book me a flight. Rome. One way. Tomorrow morning. Consider it done. Get out of there, Harry. If they find out before you leave, they might get desperate. I hung up the phone and placed it back in the box. I didn't have much time. If Preston checked his phone notification, he would see the alerts from the bank within the hour. I opened the suitcase fully. I didn't pack my clothes. I didn't want anything from this life. I took my passport, my social security card, the original deed to the house which I had kept hidden, and the black notebook. I changed into a pair of dark slacks and a heavy wool sweater I had bought years ago, one that didn't look like it belonged to a feeble old man. I put on my sturdy walking shoes. I checked the room one last time. There was a photo on the nightstand of me and my late wife Beatrice holding Preston's foie when he was 5 years old. He was smiling, missing a front tooth. I took the photo out of the frame. I looked at it for a long second. Then I flipped it over and placed it face down on the table. I left the frame empty. I unlocked the door and opened it an inch. The house was quiet now. They must have gone up to the master bedroom. I slipped into the hallway, moving with a stealth I hadn't used since I was a young man sneaking out of barracks. The floorboards creaked and I froze. Silence. I made my way to the kitchen. I needed water for the trip. I grabbed a bottle from the fridge. As I turned to leave, the overhead light snapped on. I squinted against the sudden brightness. Tiffany was standing at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked at me, then at the suitcase in my hand. Her eyes narrowed. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice slurring slightly. I gripped the handle of the suitcase. "Just going for a walk, Tiffany." With the suitcase, she laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "At midnight? You really have lost your mind. Go back to your room, Harry. Don't make me wake Preston. He's in a bad mood." She took a step toward me, blocking the path to the front door. She was used to me retreating. She was used to the Harry who apologized for taking up space. She smiled, a cruel twisting of her lips. "Did you hear me?" she said. "Back to your kennel." Something snapped in my chest. It wasn't a break. It was a realignment. The spine I thought had curved with age straightened. I grew 2 inches taller. I took a step toward her. "Move," I said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The voice that came out of me was deep resonant, the voice of a man who used to command 300 dock workers. Tiffany blinked. She took a step back, her arrogance faltering for a split second. "Excuse me," I said. "Move, Tiffany. Step aside." I didn't stop walking. I walked straight toward her. She looked into my eyes and saw something she hadn't seen before. She didn't see the confused old man. She saw the shark that had swum in the deep waters of corporate logistics for 40 years. She saw the man who had built the fortune she was wearing. She stepped aside. She didn't want to, but her body reacted to the authority before her brain could catch up. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching her wine glass. I walked past her without looking back. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the cool night air. An Uber was already waiting at the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness. "Harry," she yelled from the doorway, recovering her wits. "You can't just leave. Preston will call the police. You're incompetent." I stopped at the car door. I turned around. She was standing in the doorway of my house, framed by the light, looking small and petty. "Tell Preston to check his email," I said. I got into the car. The door slammed shut, sealing me inside a quiet, leather-scented cocoon. "JFK Airport International Terminal," I told the driver. As the car pulled away, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. The lights were still on. I imagined Tiffany running upstairs, waking Preston up. I imagined him groggily reaching for his phone. I imagined the moment he saw the notification from the bank. Alert account ending in 4490. Access denied. Insufficient funds. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. My stomach growled again. I was still hungry, but for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't starving for dignity. The driver looked at me in the mirror. "Late flight?" he asked. "Early flight," I corrected. "I'm starting a new life." "Good for you, sir." "Never too late." "No," I whispered, watching the city skyline approach. "It's right on time." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jameson. "It's done. The accounts are drained. The credit lines are severed. I've sent the eviction notice to their email. It takes effect in 24 hours. Your flight leaves at Euro 600. I'll meet you at the lounge with the new cards." I didn't reply. I just watched the road. Preston would be waking up right about now. He would be reaching for his phone. He would be trying to log into the trust portal. I checked my watch. 12:15 a.m. The audit had begun, and I was the auditor. By the time I reached the airport, my phone was vibrating incessantly. Preston. Tiffany. Preston again. I didn't answer. I let it ring. It was the soundtrack to my liberation. I walked into the terminal, the suitcase rolling smoothly beside me. I wasn't Harry the burden anymore. I was Harold Thorne, and I had just fired my son. But the real work was just beginning. Emptying the accounts was the easy part. Now I had to make sure they couldn't claw their way back. I had to dismantle the legal trap they were building for me and turn it into a cage for them. I found Jameson in the first-class lounge. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and a thick folder on the table. He didn't look like a lawyer at 1 a.m. He looked like an executioner on a break. "Harry," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "You look terrible." "I feel fantastic," I said, sitting down opposite him. "Did you get everything?" Jameson tapped the folder. I went through the last 6 months of transaction logs while the transfer was processing. "Harry, it's worse than we thought." "How bad?" He didn't just spend the stipend you gave him. He accessed the principle of the trust. He forged your digital signature to authorize a $250,000 withdrawal 3 months ago. My blood ran cold. $250,000. That was the emergency fund for the house repairs and property taxes. What did he spend it on? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Crypto, Jameson said, sliding a sheet of paper across the table. And a down payment on a boat. A boat he titled in Tiffany's name. I stared at the numbers. It wasn't just ingratitude. It was theft. Grand larceny. That changes things, I said quietly. It does, Jameson agreed. We aren't just cutting him off, Harry. We have grounds for criminal prosecution. Fraud. Embezzlement. Elder abuse. I looked out the window at the tarmac where giant planes were being refueled. I thought about the little boy I had taught to ride a bike. I thought about the man who threw water in my face. Do it, I said, but not yet. Jameson raised an eyebrow. Why wait? Because he thinks I'm senile, I said. He thinks I'm wandering the streets confused. He thinks he can still fix this with that crooked doctor. If we arrest him now, he plays the victim. He says I authorized the money in a moment of clarity and then forgot. He spins it. So what's the plan, Jameson asked. I leaned forward. We let him think he's winning. We let him try to file those competency papers. We let him walk into the trap. I want him to commit to the lie on public record. And then when he stands in front of a judge to claim guardianship over me and my money, I smiled a cold, hard expression that felt like the ice water on my skin. I walk in. Jameson grinned. He pulled a document from the folder. In that case, you'll need this. What is it? A comprehensive psychiatric evaluation dated yesterday morning. From Dr. Aris, the head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai. I called in a favor. It certifies you are of sound mind, superior cognitive function, and fully capable of managing your affairs. It predates any nonsense Preston tries to pull with his back-alley doctor. I took the paper. It was my shield. You are a good friend, Jameson. I'm an expensive lawyer, he corrected. But for you, Harry, this one is on the house. I boarded the plane to Rome an hour later. As we took off climbing over the glittering grid of New York, I looked down. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights, my son was panicking. He was realizing that the credit cards were declining. He was realizing the cash withdrawals were blocked. He was realizing that the water he threw had started a tsunami. I ordered a glass of champagne. I toasted to the dark sky. Run, Preston, I whispered to the window. Run as fast as you can. Because when I come back, I'm not coming back as your father. I'm coming back as the landlord. And rent is due. The sun rising over Manhattan didn't look like the sun I saw from my basement window in Westchester. From the 45th floor of Jameson's corner office, the light hit the steel and glass of the skyline like a promise. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal gray suit. I had left this suit in Jameson's private closet 3 years ago, back when I was still the man who commanded boardrooms, not the man who begged for breadcrumbs. It smelled of cedar and old money. It was armor. I buttoned the jacket. It was looser than I remembered. I had lost 15 pounds living on the scraps Tiffany allowed the kitchen staff to feed me, but the shoulders still fit. I looked at my reflection. The stooped, trembling old man from last night's dinner was gone. Harold Thorne was back. Jameson walked in. He didn't offer a hug or a smile. He looked like a shark sensing blood in the water. He carried a stack of files thick enough to break a table. He slammed them down on the glass surface. Coffee, he asked. Black. We sat down. No pleasantries. We were here for an autopsy of my life's work. Let's see the damage, I said. Jameson opened the first file. It was the trust fund ledger. The numbers weren't just bad. They were a crime scene. A sea of red ink stared back at me. I put on my reading glasses. My hands were steady. You thought he was just skimming your monthly pension to pay for his lease, Jameson said, his voice flat and cold. You were wrong. He cracked the digital signature on the trust account. How I asked, though, a pit was already forming in my stomach. He used your old laptop, the one you left in the study. You saved the passwords in the browser, Harry. Rookie mistake. I felt a flash of shame, hot and sharp. I had trusted him. I had trusted the boy I taught to ride a bike, not to rob me blind. How much, I asked. $250,000, Jameson replied. Withdrawn in 4 massive transactions over the last 5 months. $250,000. That was the reserve. That was the money meant for emergency surgery, for taxes, for the very end of my life, so I wouldn't be a burden on anyone. Where did it go, I asked. Jameson slid a printout across the table. It was a transaction log from a cryptocurrency exchange I had never heard of. Altcoins, Jameson said with a sneer. Garbage. He bought at the peak. The market crashed 2 weeks ago. The account value is currently less than $4,000. He incinerated $250,000. He took my safety net and threw it into a digital bonfire to play Wolf of Wall Street. I closed my eyes for a second. I saw Preston's face at the dinner table. The arrogance. The way he bragged to those investors about his keen eye for markets. He was drowning, and he was using my life raft to keep himself afloat. Keep going, I said. Jameson opened the second file. The house, my house, the Westchester estate I had bought outright. It was supposed to be free and clear. He took out a home equity line of credit, Jameson said. He forged your power of attorney. He found a notary who didn't ask questions. Probably paid him under the table. How much is the lien? $150,000. I stared at the skyline. The buildings seemed to tilt. He had mortgaged the roof over my head. And what did he buy with that? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Did he pay off his student loans? Did he try to save his failing business? Jameson pulled out a credit card statement attached to the equity line. Tiffany, he said. He pointed to the line items. Cartier, Van Cleef and Arpels, a trip to St. Bart's, a lease down payment on a Range Rover for her mother. I looked at the dates. The Cartier charge was from 3 days ago. The day before he threw ice water in my face because I asked for bread, he had bought his wife a $20,000 bracelet with the equity of my home. They were eating my flesh, Jameson. They were stripping the meat from my bones while I sat in the next room eating lettuce. Jameson closed the files. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. Here is the reality, Harry. We can stop the bleeding. We can freeze the accounts. But you need to understand the battlefield. Tell me, if we cut them off cold turkey today, if we drain the accounts to zero and revoke his access, he is going to panic. And a panicked animal attacks. Let him attack, I said. It's not that simple, Jameson warned. His voice dropped, becoming the lawyer again. He has been building a narrative, Harry. We found emails to Dr. Baxter. We found text messages to your neighbors. He has been painting a picture of you for months. The confused, aggressive, senile father. So if you empty the accounts and disappear, he goes to a judge tomorrow. He claims you are having a manic episode. He claims you are a danger to yourself and your estate. He shows the judge the sudden withdrawal of funds as proof of your instability. He files for emergency guardianship, and if he gets it, he freezes you. He invalidates your actions. He legally drags you back to that house, or worse, to a facility of his choosing. He regains control of the money to protect you, and you become a prisoner in the system. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked down at the cars moving like ants 50 stories below. I felt the anger in my chest, but it wasn't the hot, chaotic anger of the night before. It was cold. It was steel. He wants to play the legal game, I said. He wants to use the system against me. Jameson nodded. That is his plan. He thinks he's smarter than you. He thinks he has time. I turned around. I looked at the files on the table. The evidence of my son's theft. The evidence of my own blindness. He thinks I'm drowning, I said. He thinks I'm flailing in the water he threw at me. I walked back to the table and placed my hands on the cool glass surface. I don't care about the guardianship, Jameson. Let him file. Let him stand in front of a judge and lie. Harry, if he— No, listen to me. I cut him off. You are thinking like a defense attorney. You are thinking about how to protect me. I am thinking like a logistics manager. I am thinking about supply chains. I pointed at the files. He needs this money to breathe. He needs it to pay the mortgage he took out. He needs it to cover the margin calls on his crypto losses. He needs it to keep Tiffany from leaving him. That is correct, Jameson admitted. If I cut the supply line, he starves. If he starves, he makes mistakes. I picked up the trust fund ledger. I want you to prepare the paperwork for the bank. Not just a freeze, I want a full withdrawal. I want to move the liquid capital to the offshore holding we discussed. That will trigger the alarms, Jameson said. He will know within the hour. Good, I said. I want him to know. I want him to feel the air leaving the room. But the guardianship— I pulled a document from my inside jacket pocket. It was the paper I had grabbed from my safety deposit box before I left the house. It wasn't just the deed. It was a medical evaluation from 6 months ago. A routine checkup I had done secretly with a specialist in the city, just to be sure my memory was intact. Dr. Baxter is a hack, I said. This is from Dr. Aris at Mount Sinai. Clean bill of mental health, dated and notarized. Jameson took the paper. A slow smile spread across his face. You held this back. I like to have insurance, I said. Jameson laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. This kills his narrative. If he files for guardianship claiming you're senile, we produce this. We prove he's lying to the court. That's perjury. That's fraud. Exactly, I said. I buttoned my jacket. I felt the strength returning to my limbs. The hunger I felt was no longer for food. It was for justice. Let them sue, Jameson. Let them run to the courts. But first, we go to the bank. I want to see the look on the teller's face when I liquidate the account. I want to drain the pool they are swimming in. I want to leave them gasping on dry land. The revolving doors of the First National Bank on Fifth Avenue didn't squeak. They didn't make a sound. They simply glided, admitting me into the sanctuary of marble and polished brass. I walked past the long lines of people waiting to deposit their paychecks, past the tellers behind the bulletproof glass, and headed straight for the elevator at the back. I didn't need an appointment. When you hold the keys to the Thorne Family Trust, the doors open before you knock. I pressed the button for the private wealth management floor. The elevator rose smoothly, leaving the noise of the street far below. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the brass doors. I looked at the man staring back at me. He wasn't the frail old creature who had begged for bread 12 hours ago. He was a man about to drop a hammer. The elevator doors opened, and the air conditioning hit me cool and scented with white tea. Mr. Henderson was already standing there, his hand extended, his smile tight and professional. He knew. Jameson had already sent over the legal briefs. Mr. Thorne Henderson said, his voice hushed. We received the directives from your counsel. Please come this way. He led me into the corner suite. It was quiet in there, the kind of silence that costs thousands of dollars a minute. I sat in the leather chair. Henderson sat opposite me, his hands clasped on the desk. He looked nervous. He should be. He had been the one who authorized Preston's withdrawal of the $250,000 without verifying my signature personally. He knew his job was on the line if I decided to make a scene. I don't want a scene, Henderson, I said, reading his mind. I want a liquidation. Henderson nodded quickly, sweat beading on his upper lip. Of course, sir. We have prepared the transfer protocols, but I must ask, as a matter of procedure, Are you certain this will trigger significant tax events and penalties for early withdrawal on the fixed-term bonds? I leaned forward. I don't care about the penalties. I don't care about the taxes. I want every liquid asset, every stock, every bond, and every cent in the checking accounts moved. Where to steer the Cayman holding account Jameson set up, I said. And I want the credit lines severed, all of them. The black card, the Platinum Miles card, the emergency line of credit attached to the house. Kill them, Henderson began typing furiously. I watched his fingers fly across the keyboard. It was a strange feeling. For years, I had built this nest egg. I had structured the trust specifically to protect Preston. I had set it up so that I was the sole trustee, the only one with the power to move the principal, while he was a conditional beneficiary with generous spending privileges. I thought I was teaching him responsibility by giving him an allowance that looked like a salary. I thought I was training him to manage wealth. I was wrong. I was just feeding a parasite. While Henderson typed, I thought about where Preston was right now. It was 11 in the morning. He wasn't at work because he didn't have a job. He wasn't at home because Tiffany wouldn't let him rest until he bought her something to apologize for the stress of the dinner party. I knew exactly where he was. I had seen the alert on the shared family calendar he forgot to block me from. Porsche dealership. Test drive. 11:00 a.m. He was going to buy a car he couldn't afford to impress people he didn't like using money that wasn't his. At that very moment, 30 blocks away, Preston was standing on the polished concrete floor of the Porsche dealership in Manhattan. I could picture it perfectly. The smell of new rubber and expensive cologne. The salesman circling like sharks smelling fresh meat. Preston would be wearing his aviator sunglasses indoors. He would be leaning against a 9111 GT3, running his hand over the spoiler, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. Yeah, the dinner went great. He was probably telling the salesman a young guy named Chad or Brad, who was nodding enthusiastically. The investors are in. We're expanding the portfolio. I need something that says, I've arrived, you know. Something that screams success. I'll take it in black, Preston would say, snapping his fingers, and throw in the ceramic coating. I don't want to wait. I want to drive it off the lot today. The salesman would be practically salivating. Of course, Mr. Thorne. Let's just get the paperwork sorted. It'll just take a second. Back in the bank, Henderson stopped typing. He looked up at me. The transfer is ready for your final authorization, Mr. Thorne. Once you press this key, the accounts will be zeroed out. The credit cards will be deactivated immediately. The system updates in real time. I looked at the enter key on his keyboard. It was a small piece of plastic. It looked insignificant, but it was the trigger of a gun pointed directly at my son's ego. Do it, I said. Henderson pressed the key. Click. That was it. The sound of a life ending. Not a bang, but a click. Done, Henderson said. The funds are en route to the offshore entity. The cards are dead. I checked my watch. 11:15. At the dealership, the salesman was sliding the credit card terminal across the desk toward Preston. Here we go, Mr. Thorne. Just the down payment of $20,000 today, and we'll finance the rest through your private bank. Preston would pull out the heavy metal card. The one with my name on the account, but his name on the plastic. He would smile that arrogant, confident smile. He would tap the card on the machine with a flourish. Approved, he would say before the machine even beeped. Beep. The sound was harsh, a low, flat tone. Transaction declined. The salesman would frown. Must be a connection error. Let me try inserting the chip. Preston would laugh a nervous, high-pitched chuckle. Yeah, probably the Wi-Fi. That card has a limit higher than this building. The salesman inserted the card. Beep. Transaction declined. Call issuer. The air would leave the room. The other customers would start to look over. The smile would slide off Preston's face like oil. "Try it again," Preston would snap. "There's money on it. I just checked the balance yesterday." "Sir, the machine says call the issuer," the salesman would say, his voice losing its warmth. "Do you have another form of payment?" "No, I don't have another form of payment." "That is the payment." "Run it again." Preston would grab his phone. He would be furious. He would be embarrassed. He would be dialing the number on the back of the card, the concierge line for high-net-worth clients. He would put it on speakerphone so the salesman could hear the bank apologize for the mistake. I sat in Henderson's office watching the second hand on the wall clock tick. Ring, ring. Henderson's desk phone lit up. "It's him," Henderson said, looking at the caller ID. "He's calling the priority line. It's routing to my desk because I flagged the account." "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." Henderson picked up the receiver and pressed the button. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said smoothly. Henderson, Preston's voice filled the room, distorted by rage and the echo of the dealership showroom. "What the hell is going on? I'm at the Porsche dealer and my card is declining. Fix it. I have people watching me." I sat silently listening to my son scream. I took a sip of the water Henderson had poured for me. It was room temperature, just the way I liked it. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his voice calm and professional. "The card is declining because the account has been closed." "What?" Preston shouted. "What do you mean, closed?" "Who closed it? I didn't authorize that. You are not the primary account holder," Mr. Thorne, Henderson said. "You are an authorized user. The primary account holder, the trustee, has revoked all privileges." "That's a lie," Preston yelled. "My father is the trustee. He's senile. He doesn't even know what day it is. I have power of attorney." "We have no record of a power of attorney on file, sir," Henderson said. "And Mr. Harold Thorne was here in my office 5 minutes ago. He personally authorized the liquidation of all assets." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A silence so profound I could almost hear the blood draining from Preston's face. He was there," Preston whispered. "Yes, sir. He signed the transfer orders. The balance on your card is 0. The balance in the checking account is 0. The trust fund balance is 0. 0. Preston's voice cracked. 0, Henderson confirmed. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Preston didn't answer. I heard the salesman in the background. "Sir, if you can't pay, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the vehicle." I gestured to Henderson to cut the line. He hung up. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I felt lighter. The heavy burden of being a father to a grown man who refused to grow up was gone. "Thank you, Henderson," I said. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, standing up. "If I may, where will you go?" I picked up my briefcase. The notebook and the burner phone were safely inside. "I'm going to catch a plane, Henderson. I'm going to see the world I paid for but never got to visit." I walked out of the bank and into the bright midday sun of Fifth Avenue. The city was loud, chaotic, and alive. I took a deep breath. My phone began to vibrate in my pocket. Preston calling. I looked at the screen. I saw his name. I remembered the water dripping off my chin. I remembered the look in his eyes when he told me to go to my room. I declined the call. It vibrated again. Preston calling. I blocked the number. Then I blocked Tiffany. Then the house landline. I walked to the curb and hailed a cab. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to worry about picking up the dry cleaning or paying the tuition or fixing the roof. I was unemployed as a father, and the severance package was magnificent. "Driver," I said as I slid into the back seat, "take me to JFK, and take the scenic route. I'm in no hurry." As the cab merged into traffic, I opened the window. The wind hit my face. It wasn't cold water, it was freedom. Preston was standing in a car dealership with no money, no car, and no daddy to save him. He was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. But the lesson wasn't over. The money was gone, yes. But he still had the house, or at least he thought he did. He didn't know that the eviction notice Jameson had drafted was already in the mail. He didn't know that tonight, when he tried to open the front door with his digital key, the code wouldn't work. I leaned back and watched the city roll by. The game was afoot, and I was winning. The room service cart rattled softly as the waiter wheeled it into the penthouse suite of the Pierre Hotel. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 20 years, the sound of effortless luxury. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Central Park, which was turning a deep, shadowy green in the twilight. I wasn't hiding in a motel on the outskirts of Queens. I wasn't cowering in a bus station. I was sitting on top of the world in a suite that cost $3,000 a night, and I was paying for it with the interest generated by the money my son had tried to steal. The waiter lifted the silver dome. A lobster thermidor, steaming and rich, sat next to a basket of warm, crusty French bread. I tipped him $100. He bowed and left, closing the heavy door with a respectful click. I was alone. I sat down and broke a piece of bread. I didn't eat it immediately. I held it in my hand, feeling the warmth, smelling the yeast. It was the same simple food I had begged for last night, the request that had earned me a face full of ice water. I took a bite. It tasted like victory. But victory, I was learning, had a cold aftertaste. I wiped the crumbs from my mouth and pulled out the burner phone. I hadn't turned it off. I wanted them to reach me, but only on my terms. I wanted to fire the first shot of the psychological war. I opened the messaging app. I typed slowly, savoring every letter. The dinner last night was delicious. I decided to take a vacation. Don't wait up. I hit send. I placed the phone on the marble table and poured myself a glass of Pinot Noir. I watched the screen. It took exactly 30 seconds. The phone lit up. Preston calling. I let it ring. Then a text. Dad. Where are you? The cards aren't working. There's been a mistake at the bank. Call me immediately. Then another. Dad. Pick up. I'm at the dealership and they took the car back. This isn't funny. I took a sip of wine. I didn't block him yet. I wanted to see the panic set in. I wanted to measure the desperation. I opened my laptop. Before I left the house that morning, I had done one last thing. I had taken my old smartphone, the one with the cracked screen that Preston had given me as a hand-me-down 2 years ago, and I had plugged it into the charger behind the bookshelf in the living room. I had installed a simple baby monitor app set to transmit audio whenever it detected noise. It was crude but effective. They thought I was technologically illiterate. They thought I couldn't program a microwave, let alone a surveillance device. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and logged into the secure server. The audio feed crackled to life. At first, there was only the sound of slamming doors. Then Tiffany's voice, shrill and piercing, cut through the static, humiliating. Do you understand? The salesman cut the card in half, Preston. In half in front of everyone. I closed my eyes, visualizing the scene. They were in the living room, pacing on the Persian rug I had bought in Istanbul. It's a glitch, Tiff. Preston's voice was shaky, breathless. It has to be a glitch. The bank's system must be down. Dad probably forgot to update a security question or something. Forgot, Tiffany screamed. He didn't forget, you idiot. He emptied it. The teller told you zero balance. I heard the sound of glass shattering. Preston must have thrown something. Probably the crystal vase on the mantelpiece. He can't just take it back, Preston yelled. It's a trust. I'm the beneficiary. You're the beneficiary when he dies, Tiffany shrieked. While he's alive, he's the trustee. He owns us, Preston. We are living in his house, driving his cars, spending his money. And he just turned off the tap. There was a heavy silence, broken only by Preston's ragged breathing. I took another bite of lobster. What are we going to do? Preston whispered. The mortgage payment is auto-drafted tomorrow. The boat payment. The club membership. If they bounce, we're done. My credit score will tank. They'll repossess the Range Rover. We need cash, Tiffany said. Her voice dropped, becoming low and dangerous. How much cash do we have in the safe? Nothing, Preston said. I used the cash to pay the gardener last week. You are useless, Tiffany snapped. I heard the rustling of fabric. She was probably pacing again. Where is he? She asked. I don't know. He texted me. He said he's on vacation. Vacation? With what money? He has our money. It's his money, Tiffany, Preston muttered, a rare moment of clarity piercing his panic. Shut up, it's ours. We earned it by putting up with him for 3 years. We earned it by letting him live here like a leech. I gripped the wine glass tighter. A leech. I had paid off their student loans. I had paid for their wedding. We have to find him, Tiffany said. We have to find him and make him sign it back over. He won't do it, Preston said. Did you see his face last night when he walked out? He looked different. He looked like he did when I was a kid. Like the boss. Then we take the choice away from him, Tiffany said. The audio feed went quiet for a moment. I leaned closer to the laptop. What do you mean? Preston asked. He's gone, Preston. He wandered off. He's spending thousands of dollars he doesn't have. He's sending cryptic texts. He's erratic. So he's having a breakdown, Tiffany said. Her voice was smooth now, calculating. It's Alzheimer's, rapid onset dementia. He's a danger to himself. He emptied the accounts in a fit of paranoia. I don't know, Tiff. Listen to me. If we get him declared incompetent, everything he did today is void. The bank transfer void. The account closures void. We get emergency guardianship. We get power of attorney. We get control of the trust. And we get the money back. I sat back in the plush hotel chair. They were predictable. Jameson had warned me, but hearing them plot to strip me of my mind was a different kind of horror. But we need a doctor, Preston said. Dr. Sterling wouldn't sign. He warned Dad. Screw Sterling, Tiffany spat. Call Dr. Baxter. You said he wanted 10 grand. We don't have 10 grand, Tiff. We don't have $10. Use your watch, she said. The Rolex. Pawn it. That gets us the cash. We pay Baxter. He signs the affidavit stating Harry has been deteriorating for months. We file an emergency ex parte motion with the family court tomorrow morning. We tell the judge he's missing and mentally unstable. The judge freezes the assets and grants us temporary custody. Then we find him, drag him back here, and lock him in the basement until he signs whatever we want. Or we shove him in a home and throw away the key. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. It was a solid plan. If I were truly the confused old man they thought I was, it would work. They would use the legal system as a weapon. They would paint me as a senile runaway, and the law designed to protect the vulnerable would be used to imprison me. I heard Preston sigh, a long, defeated sound that turned into resolve. Okay, he said. I'll sell the watch. I'll call Baxter. Do it now, Tiffany ordered. We need that affidavit by morning. I took off the headphones. The silence of the penthouse was absolute. I looked at the remains of my dinner. I wasn't hungry anymore. They were going to try to erase me. They weren't just content with theft. They wanted to invalidate my existence. They wanted to turn Harold Thorne into a John Doe with a broken brain. I stood up and walked to the desk in the corner of the room. I opened the leather briefcase I had carried out of the house. I pulled out the thick manila envelope Jameson had given me. Inside was the document that would be their undoing. It wasn't just a medical report. It was a fortress. 3 days ago, anticipating the water, anticipating the betrayal, I had gone to the city. I had undergone a full neurological workup at the most prestigious clinic in the state. MRI scans, cognitive testing, psychological evaluation. The report was dated, notarized, and stamped. Patient Harold Thorne, age 68. Diagnosis: cognitive function in the 99th percentile for his age group. No signs of dementia. No signs of Alzheimer's. Fully competent. I held the paper in my hand. It was more than a diagnosis. It was a trap. If they filed that motion tomorrow, if Preston stood up in court and swore under oath that I was incompetent, if he submitted a fake affidavit from a crooked doctor dated after my clean bill of health, he wouldn't just lose the case. He would be committing perjury. He would be filing a fraudulent legal instrument. He would be walking into a felony. I picked up my burner phone. I needed to make sure they took the bait. I needed them to be so sure of their victory that they ran full speed off the cliff. I typed a new message to Preston. I'm confused. I don't know where I am. I think I'm in a hotel. The money is gone. I'm scared. It was the perfect lure. It was exactly what they needed to show the judge. A text proving my confusion. It would embolden them. It would make them think I was breaking down just as they claimed. I hit send. Almost immediately the phone buzzed. Dad, stay there. Don't move. We are coming to help you. Just tell us where you are. We love you. We love you. I laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound in the empty room. They loved the ATM. They loved the house. They didn't give a damn about the man. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone. Let them run around the city tonight. Let them pawn the watch. Let them bribe the doctor. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink. I needed a clear head. Tomorrow wasn't just a legal battle. It was an execution. I was going to let them file the papers. I was going to let them stand before a judge and lie. And then just when they thought they had the collar around my neck, I was going to walk through the courtroom doors. I went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. The steam filled the room. I looked at myself in the mirror. The water from the dinner table was gone, but the memory of the cold shock was still there. I wasn't just going to leave the country. Not yet. I had one more appointment to keep. I walked to the bedroom and laid out my suit for the morning. I checked my flight itinerary. I had pushed the flight back by 24 hours. Rome could wait. Justice couldn't. I lay down in the king-sized bed. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and smooth. I closed my eyes, visualizing the courtroom. I visualized Preston's face when the judge read my medical report. I visualized the moment the handcuffs clicked. Sleep came easily. It always does when you know you're the one holding the knife. My phone buzzed at 8:00 a.m. sharp. It was Preston. The text was carefully worded, stripped of the panic from the night before. Dad, I spoke to the insurance company. They are flagging your policy because of the lapse in payments. They need a current health evaluation to reinstate it immediately, or you lose coverage. I made an appointment with Dr. Baxter. He can squeeze you in at 10. I'll pick you up. It was a clumsy lie. Health insurance doesn't work like that, and policies don't lapse overnight because of a frozen bank account. But it was the only card he had left to play. He needed me in a room with his hired gun. He needed a paper trail that said Harold Thorne was losing his grip. I replied with the trembling fingers of the man he wanted me to be. Okay, son. I'm confused about the payments. I'll meet you there. Which hospital? He sent the address. It wasn't the pristine medical center where Dr. Sterling practiced. It was a private clinic in Queens tucked between a pawn shop and a liquor store. A place where questions were optional and cash was king. I dressed in the same clothes I had worn to leave the house, the wool sweater and slacks, but I made adjustments. I unbuttoned the collar to look disheveled. I didn't shave. I practiced a slight tremor in my left hand. If they wanted a performance, I would give them an Oscar-worthy show. When I arrived at the clinic, Preston was pacing on the sidewalk. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. The Rolex was gone from his wrist. He had pawned it, just as Tiffany had ordered. $10,000 to buy my life. Dad, he exclaimed, rushing over to grab my arm. His grip was too tight, desperate. You made it. Come on, we're late. He steered me toward the entrance like I was a prisoner being marched to the gallows. I feel dizzy. Preston, I mumbled, stumbling slightly on the threshold. Why are we here again? Just a checkup, Dad. Just to sign some papers. Don't worry about it. Tiffany is really worried about you. We just want to make sure you're safe. We entered the waiting room. It smelled of stale antiseptic and old magazines. There was no receptionist, just a sliding glass window that was firmly shut. Preston knocked aggressively. We're here to see Dr. Baxter, he announced to the glass. Thorne. The window slid open. A woman with tired eyes looked at us. He's expecting you. Room 3. Preston dragged me down the hallway. He was sweating. I could smell the fear on him. He was betting everything on this. If this doctor didn't sign the competency waiver, Preston was out of options. He was out of money. He was out of time. We entered room 3. Dr. Baxter was sitting behind a metal desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. He was a small, oily man with thinning hair and a stain on his white coat. He didn't look like a doctor. He looked like a bookie who had found a stethoscope. Ah, Mr. Thorne, Baxter said, standing up, but not offering his hand. And this must be the father. Yes, Preston said, closing the door and locking it. This is Harold. Baxter looked at me. His eyes didn't scan for symptoms. They scanned for weakness. He saw the unshaven face, the slumped shoulders, the tremor I was projecting. He smiled, a wet, unpleasant thing. Please sit down, Harold Baxter said. I sat in the hard plastic chair, clutching my old leather briefcase to my chest like a shield. What's happening? I asked, pitching my voice high and thin. Is it my heart? Baxter glanced at Preston. Preston nodded slightly. No, Harold. It's not your heart, Baxter said, opening a file folder on his desk. It was empty. He hadn't even bothered to create a fake chart. We're just going to do a quick cognitive assessment. Your son tells me you've been having some trouble lately. Getting lost, forgetting names. Spending money erratically. I looked at Preston. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at the wall, tapping his foot. I don't know, I stammered. I went for a walk last night. I wanted bread. Bread, Baxter repeated, scribbling on a notepad. Disorientation. Fixation on food. Paranoia. He looked up at me. Harold, do you know what year it is? It's 2024, isn't it? I asked, feigning uncertainty. Baxter made a tisk-tisk sound. And do you know who the president is? I hesitated. I let my mouth hang open for a second. See, Preston interjected, unable to help himself. He's totally gone. He emptied his bank account yesterday because he thought the government was coming for him. He's a danger to himself, Doc. He needs 24-hour care. Baxter nodded gravely. Classic rapid onset dementia. I've seen it 100 times. The decline is steep. He requires immediate custodial guardianship. He pulled a pre-printed form from his drawer. It was a certificate of medical incompetency. It was already filled out. All it needed was his signature and a stamp. I'm going to recommend immediate placement in a secure facility, Baxter said, uncapping a pen. For his own safety, of course. Once I sign this, Mr. Thorne, you can take it to the family court clerk. They'll grant the emergency order by noon. Preston let out a breath he had been holding since he pawned his watch. Thank you, Doctor. You're saving his life. Baxter lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. I watched the ink flow. I watched the letters form. B-A-X. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight. I uncrossed my legs and placed my briefcase on the desk, directly on top of the form he was signing. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the metal desk was like a gunshot in the small room. Baxter jumped. The pen skidded across the paper, ruining the signature. "What the hell are you doing?" Preston snapped. "Dad, sit down." I ignored him. I looked directly at Baxter. The fog in my eyes cleared, instantly replaced by the cold, hard stare of a man who had negotiated with union bosses and cartel logistics managers. "You misspelled perjury, Doctor," I said. My voice was deep, steady, and commanding. Baxter froze. He looked at me, confused by the sudden transformation. "Excuse me," I opened the briefcase. I didn't rush. I let the clicks of the latches echo in the silence. I reached inside and pulled out a thick blue folder. It wasn't a medical record. It was a dossier. Jameson's private investigator had been busy. He had been expensive, but he was thorough. I slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Baxter shaking hands with a pharmaceutical rep in a parking lot. I slid another paper across. A copy of a lawsuit filed 3 years ago. Civil Action 44902, malpractice and wrongful death, settled out of court. And another, a disciplinary hearing notice from the State Medical Board regarding the overprescription of opioids. Baxter's face turned the color of old ash. He looked at the papers, then at me. His hands started to tremble, and this time it wasn't an act. "Who are you?" Baxter whispered. "I am the man you were about to commit to a cage for $10,000, I said. I pulled out the final document. It was a draft complaint to the state licensing board prepared by Jameson. It detailed Baxter's meeting with Preston, the bribe, the lack of a genuine examination, and the conspiracy to commit fraud. Preston stood up, his face twisted in shock. "Dad." "What is this?" "Shut up, Preston," I said without looking at him. "I'm talking to the doctor." I leaned forward. Baxter shrank back in his chair. "Here is how this goes, Doctor. You are going to take that competency form and you are going to shred it. Then you are going to refund my son the $10,000 he paid you." "I didn't take any money," Baxter squeaked. "Don't lie to me," I barked. "I know you took cash. I know my son pawned his watch to pay you. Give it back, now." Baxter fumbled in his pocket. He pulled out a thick envelope. He threw it on the desk as if it were burning. "Take it, just take it and get out." I didn't touch the money. I looked at Preston. "Pick it up," I said. Preston stared at me. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing candy only to realize the candy was poisoned. He looked at the money, then at the dossier, then at me. The reality was crashing down on him. The old man wasn't senile. The old man was a shark. Pick it up. Preston reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed the envelope. "Now get out," I said to Preston. "Dad." "Please, I didn't get out," I roared. "Wait on the curb. I'm not done with the doctor." Preston scrambled for the door. He unlocked it and fled into the hallway, leaving me alone with the man who had been willing to sell my freedom. I stood up. I towered over Baxter. He was sweating profusely now. "If you ever come near me or my family again," I said, tapping the blue folder, "I will mail this to the board. I will mail it to the district attorney. I will make sure you never practice medicine again. Do you understand?" "Yes." Baxter wheezed. "Yes, I understand, please. Just go." I closed my briefcase. I adjusted my collar. "You should clean your coat, Doctor," I said coldly. "You look unprofessional." I walked out of the office. I walked down the hallway past the empty waiting room and out into the bright sunlight of Queens. Preston was standing on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope of cash to his chest. He looked small. He looked broken. He saw me emerge upright and strong, and he took a step back. "Dad," he started, his voice trembling. "It wasn't what you think. I was trying to help." I stopped in front of him. I looked at the son I had loved. I looked at the enemy I had defeated. You pawned your watch, Preston, I said. That was a gift for your 30th birthday. It was engraved. I had to. We have bills, Dad. The mortgage. The mortgage you took out on my house, the house you tried to steal. He didn't answer. He looked down at the sidewalk. Keep the money, I said, gesturing to the envelope. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Really, yes, I said. You're going to need it. Why? Because you have 24 hours to vacate the premises. What Preston's face dropped. You can't kick us out. It's our home, it's my home, Preston, and I'm selling it. I stepped to the curb and raised my hand. A yellow cab swerved toward us. You have $10,000 in your hand, I said as I opened the cab door. That should cover a deposit on a studio apartment, if you hurry. Dad, wait. You can't leave me here. What do I tell Tiffany? Tell her the plan didn't work, I said. Tell her the old man wasn't crazy. Tell her he was just disappointed. I got into the cab. Where to? The driver asked. The airport, I said. And this time, I mean it. As the cab pulled away, I watched Preston standing on the dirty sidewalk in front of the pawnshop clinic. He was holding the envelope of cash, staring after me. He looked like a man who had just realized that the water he threw had turned into a tidal wave and he had forgotten how to swim. I took out my phone. I had one more call to make. Jameson. It's done, I said when he answered. Baxter is neutralized. Preston has the cash, but he knows he's homeless. Good, Jameson said. I'll have the eviction notice served by a courier within the hour. And Harry? Yes. The real estate agent called. We have a cash offer on the house, 20% over asking price. They want a quick close. They don't care about the condition. Sell it, I said. Sell it all. I hung up. I looked out at the city passing by. I was tired. But it was a good tired. The kind of tired you feel after cleaning out a garage full of rot. I was done with the past. I was done with the lies. I was going to Italy. I was going to drink wine and eat bread and look at art. And I was going to do it alone because alone was better than the company of thieves. But Preston wasn't done yet. I knew my son. He had $10,000 and a desperate wife. He wouldn't give up the house that easily. He would try one last thing. He would try to break in. He would try to find the deed. He would try to physically intimidate me if he thought I was coming back. He didn't know I had already hired private security to watch the property. He didn't know that tonight, when he tried to sneak back in to steal the silverware, he wouldn't be meeting a confused old father. He would be meeting a team of ex-military contractors with strict instructions to treat intruders as hostile. I closed my eyes and smiled. The checkmate was coming. And it was going to be beautiful. I stood outside the wrought iron gates of the estate I had purchased with the proceeds of 40 years of grinding work. It was 4:00 p.m. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the manicured lawn, a lawn I used to mow myself before my hip gave out. Beside me stood Sheriff Miller. We had played poker together every Thursday night for a decade, until Preston told me I couldn't have friends over anymore because it disturbed his focus. Miller wasn't smiling today. He adjusted his belt, the leather creaking, and looked at the house. There are 3 cars in the driveway, Harry Miller observed. A Lexus and a BMW. Neither belongs to your son. I nodded. I knew what was happening. My private investigator had flagged the listing an hour ago. It wasn't on the MLS. It was a pocket listing. A shadow sale. Preston was trying to offload the house for cash quick and dirty to an overseas investor who didn't ask too many questions about title insurance. He was trying to sell the ground from under my feet before the court system could catch up to him. He thinks he owns it, I said. He thinks the power of attorney he forged gives him the right to sign the deed. Miller spit on the asphalt. He won't be signing anything today. You ready? I adjusted my jacket. I touched the pocket where the eviction notice sat folded and heavy as a brick. I'm ready. We walked up the driveway. I didn't hurry. I wanted to catch them in the act. I wanted the ink to be wet. The front door was open. I could hear voices echoing in the foyer. It's a magnificent property, Preston was saying. His voice was pitched high, frantic, the manic energy of a man trying to outrun an avalanche. Custom finishes, Venetian plaster, imported marble. We are letting it go for $2 million cash because we are relocating to Europe immediately. My father, well, he passed recently, and the memories are too painful. He had killed me off. It was easier than explaining the truth. I walked through the open door. Miller followed, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. We entered the living room. Preston was standing by the fireplace holding a contract. Tiffany was pouring champagne for a couple in their 50s, sleek and tanned looking, like they smelled a bargain. A real estate broker I didn't recognize was uncapping a pen. So just sign here, Mr. Thorne, the broker said, and the wire transfer will be initiated instantly. Preston reached for the pen. His hand was shaking. He was seconds away from committing real estate fraud on a massive scale. Don't sign that, Preston, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room like smoke. Preston froze. The pen hovered over the paper. He turned his head slowly like a mechanical doll with rusted gears. When he saw me, the color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. He dropped the pen. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. Dad, he whispered. Tiffany dropped the champagne flute. It shattered, splashing sparkling wine onto the Persian rug. She stared at me as if I were a ghost dragging chains. You're supposed to be at the doctor, she stammered. I ignored her. I looked at the buyers. They looked confused, their eyes darting between me and the sheriff. Who is this? The male buyer asked, annoyed. We were told the owner was deceased. I am the owner, I said, stepping further into the room. I am Harold Thorne, and I am very much alive. I looked at the broker. And you are trespassing. The broker looked at Preston. You said he was dead. You showed me a death certificate. I forged it. Tiffany screamed suddenly, her nerve breaking. No, wait, I didn't mean that. I meant, he's confused. He thinks he's the owner. Officer, please, this man has dementia. He escaped from a facility. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He didn't look at Tiffany. He looked straight at Preston. Preston Thorne. Miller said, his voice booming. Step away from the table. Preston backed away, his hands raising instinctively. Sheriff Miller. You know me. We've met. My dad he's having an episode. I walked to the table and picked up the contract. I scanned it. $2 million. A steal for this neighborhood. He was selling my legacy for pennies on the dollar just to get out of town. I looked at the buyers. This property is held in the Thorne Family Irrevocable Trust, I told them. I am the sole trustee. The man who tried to sell you this house is a beneficiary with zero executive power. If you sign this, you are buying nothing but a lawsuit. And since you are now aware of the fraud proceeding, would make you accessories. The woman grabbed her purse. Let's go, she hissed to her husband. This is a scam. Wait, Preston pleaded, grabbing the man's sleeve. I can explain. I have the authority. He signed it over. Get your hands off me, the buyer snapped, shoving Preston back. They fled. The broker followed them, shooting a look of pure hatred at Preston before slamming the door. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was just us now, the family, and the law. Preston slumped against the mantel. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet. Why, he asked. Why are you doing this? I needed that money. You needed my money, I corrected. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. I walked over to Preston. He flinched as if he thought I was going to hit him. I wouldn't dirty my hands. I thrust the papers against his chest. What is this? He asked, his voice trembling. Read it. He opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the document. Notice to vacate. Immediate eviction. You're kicking us out, he whispered. I am removing unauthorized occupants from trust property, I said. You have violated the terms of your residency. What terms? Tiffany shrieked. We live here, we take care of you. The clause regarding the care and maintenance of the grantor, I said calmly. Specifically, the section about abuse. Abuse, Preston cried. We never hit you. You threw ice water in my face because I was hungry, I said. You plotted to lock me in a state institution. You forged my signature. You sold my belongings. That is abuse, Preston. And under the terms of the trust, any beneficiary who abuses the trustee is automatically disinherited and evicted. Disinherited. Tiffany's face contorted. She looked at Preston. You told me it was ironclad. You told me he couldn't change it. He lied to you, I said to her, just like he lied to me. Tiffany turned on him. She started hitting his chest with her fists. You idiot! You useless idiot! You promised me. You said we were rich. You said the old man was checking out. Preston tried to fend her off. Tiffany, stop. I didn't know. You didn't know. She screamed. You don't know anything. You lost the car, you lost the cash, and now we're homeless. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Harry, please. You can't do this. I'm innocent. I tried to stop him. He forced me. I looked at her. I remembered her voice on the recording. Use your watch. Pawn it. We need that affidavit. You are listed on the eviction order as well. Tiffany, I said. You have 24 hours. 24 hours. Preston fell to his knees. It was a clumsy, desperate movement. He grabbed the hem of my jacket. He looked up at me, the arrogance gone, replaced by the pathetic terror of a child who has broken a window. Dad, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was the stress. You don't know what it's like. The business failed. The loans. I was drowning. I just needed a lifeline. I didn't mean to hurt you. I looked down at him. I looked at the son I had carried on my shoulders. I looked at the man who had looked at me with disgust across the dinner table. It was just pressure, Dad. He sobbed, burying his face in my coat. Just so much pressure. I stepped back, pulling my coat from his grip. I looked at the water stain on the floor where the champagne had spilled. Pressure, I repeated. I remembered the cold shock of the water. I remembered the humiliation in front of strangers. I remembered the hunger. You threw water on me to cool me down, didn't you? I asked softly. Preston looked up, confusion in his tear-filled eyes. What you said, I was embarrassing you. You said I was aggressive. You wanted to cool me off. I didn't mean... Well, Preston, I said, my voice hardening into stone. I am returning the favor. I gestured to the empty room, to the house he thought was his birthright. I am relieving your pressure. You don't have to worry about the mortgage anymore. You don't have to worry about the property tax. You don't have to worry about taking care of your old father. I leaned down until my face was inches from his. I am taking it all away. The money, the house, the burden. You are free, Preston. You are free to go out into the world and make your own way. You are free to feel the pressure of survival without my safety net catching you. He stared at me, his mouth open, realizing that his plea had backfired. He realized that I wasn't punishing him out of anger. I was punishing him with consequences. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "24 hours, folks," Miller said. "I'll have a deputy parked outside. If you aren't gone by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow, you will be arrested for trespassing. And don't try to take the furniture. It's inventoried." I turned my back on them. Dad Preston wailed, "Where will we go?" I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. "I hear the state facility off the highway has vacancies," I said. "It's cheap." I walked out of the house. I walked past the sheriff's cruiser. I walked down the driveway I had paid for. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clean. Behind me, I heard the sounds of a marriage collapsing. Tiffany was screaming. Preston was sobbing. It was a symphony of destruction, and for the first time, I wasn't the one holding the baton. I got into the waiting car. "Take me back to the hotel," I said. But I knew the war wasn't over. Preston was desperate. A desperate man with $10,000 in his pocket, and a wife who despised him was a dangerous thing. He wouldn't just leave. He would try to hurt me one last time. He would try to take something that couldn't be recovered. I looked at the house as we drove away. Tonight would be the end of it. I had set the stage. I had baited the trap. Now I just had to wait for the rat to come back for the cheese. The silence in the house was heavier than the furniture. For 3 years, this mansion in Westchester had been filled with the noise of my son's unearned confidence and his wife's performative laughter. It had echoed with the sounds of parties I wasn't invited to despite paying the catering bills. It had vibrated with the bass of the surround sound system I had purchased, but was never allowed to control. Now at 8 in the evening, the silence was absolute. I walked through the living room. The sheriff's deputies had escorted them out 4 hours ago. It had been ugly. Tiffany had clung to the doorframe screaming that she had rights, that she was a resident, that I was a monster. Preston had cried a humiliating, sniveling sound that made the deputies look away in embarrassment. They had left with 2 suitcases each and the clothes on their backs. The rest, the art, the electronics, the designer wardrobe bought with my home equity line remained. I looked at the Italian leather sofa. It was a beautiful piece of furniture. I remembered the day Preston ordered it. He had told me to sit on the old recliner in the basement because the leather scratched easily. I took out my phone and dialed a number I had looked up earlier. It was the director of a local charity that furnished homes for veterans transitioning out of homelessness. "This is Harold Thorne," I said, when the director answered. "I have a donation." "Yes, furniture. A lot of it. Sofas, dining sets, televisions, bedroom suites." The director asked when they could schedule a pickup. "Tonight," I said. "I want it gone tonight. I will pay double for the overtime and the trucks. Just clear the house." I didn't want to sell it. Selling it meant negotiating. Selling it meant placing a value on things that had cost me my dignity. I wanted to purge it. I wanted to scrub the house clean of their fingerprints. By 9 o'clock, 3 large box trucks were idling in the driveway. A team of movers, efficient and silent, swarmed the house. I sat on a folding chair in the kitchen, drinking tap water from a paper cup, watching my son's life be dismantled. I watched them carry out the 80-inch television Preston used to watch sports while I ate dinner alone. I watched them box up Tiffany's collection of crystal vases. I watched them dismantle the king-sized bed from the master suite, the bed I had paid for, but never slept in. "Take it all," I told the foreman. "Leave nothing but the walls." It was a funeral for a life that never really existed. The neighbors watched from their windows, peeking through the curtains. Let them look. They had seen Preston parade around like a king for years. Now they could see the castle crumbled. By midnight, the house was empty. The trucks pulled away their taillights, fading into the darkness. The rooms echoed. The hardwood floors gleamed under the recessed lighting. It was just me, the folding chair, and the ghost of the man I used to be. I wasn't sad. That was the strange part. I expected grief. I expected to feel the hollow ache of a father who has failed. But I didn't feel failure. I felt like a surgeon who had just successfully cut out a gangrenous limb. It hurt, but the rot was gone. I turned off the lights downstairs. I didn't go to a hotel. I needed to spend one last night here. I needed to reclaim the space. I walked up the grand staircase, my footsteps loud in the emptiness. I went to the master bedroom. It was just a large, empty square now. I placed my folding chair in the center of the room facing the door. I knew he would come. I knew my son. He wasn't smart, but he was entitled. And entitlement is a powerful fuel. He was sitting in a cheap motel room off the interstate right now, staring at the peeling wallpaper, listening to Tiffany scream at him, "Tamara." He was realizing that $10,000 wouldn't last a month with her spending habits. He was realizing that he had no job, no references, and a reputation that was currently being shredded in the rumor mill of the country club. He would blame me. He wouldn't see his theft or his cruelty. He would only see that I had taken his toys away, and he would want them back. I sat in the dark waiting. I checked my watch. 2:00 a.m., the witching hour for desperate men. I heard it at 2:15, a subtle scrape against the glass of the French doors on the ground floor patio. Preston still had his key, but I had changed the digital codes on the locks immediately after the sheriff left. He was locked out. But he knew the latch on the patio door was faulty. He knew because he had promised to fix it 6 months ago and never did. I heard the latch give. A soft click. The slide of the door. Footsteps. Heavy, clumsy footsteps on the hardwood. He wasn't trying to be stealthy. He was angry. I heard him moving through the empty living room. I heard a curse word as he bumped into a wall where a cabinet used to be. He was confused. He was expecting obstacles, furniture, the trappings of his life. He was finding a void. "Harry," he screamed. The name echoed up the stairs. Not Dad. "Harry." I didn't answer. I sat perfectly still. I heard him running up the stairs. He was panting. He sounded like a wild animal. He kicked open the door to the master bedroom. The hallway light cast a long, distorted shadow across the floor. He stood in the doorway, his chest heaving. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit from the dealership, his tie missing his shirt unbuttoned. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. In his right hand he held a knife. It wasn't a weapon of war. It was a serrated bread knife he must have stolen from the motel kitchenette or grabbed from the patio grill. It was ridiculous. It was terrifying. "You're here," he rasped. I saw the light. I looked at him. I didn't stand up. "I'm here, Preston." "Where is it?" he demanded, stepping into the room. "Where is my stuff? Where is the furniture gone?" I said. "Donated to people who will appreciate it." "You had no right," he screamed, slashing the knife through the empty air. "That was mine. I picked it out." "You bought it with my money," I said calmly. "Therefore, it was mine, and I disposed of it." He took another step toward me. The knife trembled in his hand. "Fix it," he said. His voice dropped to a growl. "Fix it right now. I have a check in my pocket. A blank check. You are going to sign it. You are going to transfer the funds back. You are going to call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. And if I don't..." He raised the knife. "Then I'm going to carve it out of you. You old leech. You think you can just throw me away? I gave you a home. I let you live here. You let me live in the storage room of the house I bought." I corrected him. "You threw water in my face because I asked for food. You are not the victim here, Preston. Stop talking," he yelled. "Sign the check. I'm not leaving here. Poor Tiffany will leave me. Do you understand? She'll leave me." "That sounds like a blessing," I said. He roared and lunged. He closed the distance between the door and my chair in 3 strides. The knife came up, aiming for my chest. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Because I wasn't alone. From the shadows of the walk-in closet to my right, a figure emerged. It was a blur of motion, faster than Preston, harder than concrete. Mr. Graves did not look like a security guard. He looked like a man who broke things for a living. He was 6'4", wearing tactical black, and he moved with the silent precision of a predator. I had hired him at 5:00 p.m. the moment the sheriff left. I paid him $5,000 for one night of work. It was the best investment I had ever made. Graves caught Preston's wrist in midair. The sound of the impact was sickening, a wet thud of bone hitting muscle. Preston screamed. The knife clattered to the floor, skidding into the corner. Graves didn't stop. He twisted Preston's arm behind his back, kicking his legs out from under him. Preston hit the floor face first. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gasp. Graves placed a knee on Preston's back, pinning him to the floorboards like an insect. "Stay down," Graves said. His voice was gravel. "Do not move." Preston writhed, trying to buck him off, but he was helpless. He started to sob into the floor. "Dad! Dad, help me! He's breaking my arm!" I stood up from the folding chair. I walked over to where my son lay pinned to the ground. I looked down at him. I looked at the knife in the corner. "You tried to kill me, Preston," I said. "No, I just wanted to scare you. I wouldn't have done it." "You brought a knife to a conversation with your father," I said. "You broke into my house. That is attempted murder. That is home invasion. That is assault with a deadly weapon." Mr. Graves looked up at me. "Shall I call the police, Mr. Thorne? We have him detained. The response time is 3 minutes. Preston started to beg. "No police, please, Dad. I'll go to jail. I have a record. They'll put me away for years. Please. I'm your son." I looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees and come running to me for a bandage. I saw the teenager I taught to drive. I saw the man who threw water in my face. I thought about calling the police. I thought about seeing him in handcuffs, seeing him in an orange jumpsuit behind glass. It would be justice. It would be what he deserved. But then I would have to stay. I would have to testify. I would have to see him again. I would be tied to this city, to this misery for months of trials and hearings. I didn't want justice anymore. I wanted erasure. I looked at Graves. "Let him up." Graves hesitated. "Sir, he is armed and dangerous." "He's not dangerous," I said. "He's pathetic. Let him up." Graves stood back, keeping his hands ready. Preston scrambled to his knees, clutching his wrist. He looked up at me, tears and snot running down his face. "Dad, thank you. I knew you wouldn't." "Shut up," I said. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark lawn. "I'm not calling the police, Preston. Not because I love you, not because I forgive you, but because I don't want to spend another second of my life thinking about you." I turned back to him. "If I call the police, you become a court case. You become a burden on my calendar. You become a reason I can't get on my plane tomorrow. I am done carrying you." I pointed to the door. "This is my final gift to you. Freedom. You are not going to prison tonight. You are going to the street. You are going to wake up tomorrow with no money, no home, no wife, and no father to blame. You are going to have to survive on your own merits." "But Dad..." "Get out," I said, before I change my mind. "And Preston." He looked at me trembling. "If you ever come near me again, if you ever try to contact me, if I ever see your face, Graves here won't stop at the wrist." Preston looked at the large man standing in the shadows. He looked at the knife on the floor. He realized he had lost the only leverage he ever had, my mercy. He stood up shakily. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't apologize again. He just turned and ran. He ran out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and out the broken patio door. I heard his footsteps fading into the night, running back toward the cheap motel, running toward a life of mediocrity he had tried so hard to cheat. I looked at Graves. "Clear the room," I said. Graves picked up the knife. He nodded. "Good luck in Italy, Mr. Thorne." I sat back down on the folding chair in the empty room. I listened to the silence. It was different now. It wasn't heavy, it was empty, it was clean. My son was gone. The house was gone. The money was safe. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise. I had a plane to catch. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the destination. The next morning at 9 o'clock sharp, my lawyer Jameson sat in his glass-walled office overlooking Manhattan. I wasn't there. I was in a private car service heading to JFK, sipping sparkling water and watching the city retreat into the distance. But Jameson recounted every second of the meeting to me later, and I know my son well enough to picture the scene with absolute clarity. Preston arrived 10 minutes late. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit from the day before, the one he had worn to the dealership and then to the eviction. He hadn't shaved. He smelled of cheap motel soap and desperation. He didn't come with a lawyer because he couldn't afford one. He walked into Jameson's office with the swagger of a man who believes he still holds a winning lottery ticket, even if it's a little crumpled. He sat down without being offered a chair. He looked at Jameson, who was sitting behind his desk with a single file folder in front of him. "Okay," Preston said, leaning forward, his eyes darting around the room. "My dad had his tantrum. He kicked us out. He proved his point. Now let's talk numbers." Jameson didn't blink. He adjusted his cufflinks. "What numbers are we discussing?" "Mr. Thorne." "The settlement," Preston said, slamming his hand on the desk. "The buyout." "Look, I know how trusts work. I'm the beneficiary. He can't just cut me off completely without cause. There are statutes. There are rights. If he wants me to go away quietly, if he wants to avoid a messy competency hearing that drags on for years, I want a payout." Jameson stared at him. He let the silence stretch until Preston started fidgeting. "You believe you are owed a settlement?" Jameson asked calmly. "I am owed my inheritance," Preston shouted. "I spent 3 years taking care of him. I put up with his moods. I managed the estate. That house is half mine by sweat equity alone." Jameson opened the file folder. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. It was the original trust agreement, the one I had signed 10 years ago after Beatrice died. "You are correct about one thing," Preston Jameson said. "You are the named beneficiary of the Thorne Family Trust." Preston slumped back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his tired face. "See, I knew it. He can't touch the principal without my consent eventually." "So how much is it?" $8,010,000. "I'll take $2 million cash now and sign a waiver." Jameson turned the page. He slid the document across the desk, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "However," Jameson said, his voice dropping an octave, "you seem to have skipped the ethics and conduct section. Specifically, Article 9, Paragraph C. We call it the Beatrice Clause." Preston squinted at the paper. "What is that?" "Read it," Jameson commanded. Preston mumbled the words. "In the event that the beneficiary commits any act of physical, emotional, or financial abuse against the grantor, or fails to provide a standard of care commensurate with human dignity, all rights to the trust shall be immediately and irrevocably forfeited." He stopped reading. He looked up, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Okay, so that's standard boilerplate. I never abused him. I never hit him. I fed him. I housed him. You can't prove abuse. It's his word against mine, and no judge is going to disinherit a son based on a senile old man's complaints about the thermostat." Jameson smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just heard the trap snap shut. "We don't need a judge's interpretation, Preston. The trust defines abuse quite clearly, and we don't need your father's word." Jameson reached for his laptop. He turned the screen around so Preston could see it. He pressed play. The video was high definition. The camera I had installed in the dining room chandelier 3 months ago captured everything in wide angle. There was the dinner table. There were the investors. There was Tiffany sneering. There was me asking for bread. And then there was Preston. The camera caught the rage in his eyes. It caught the way he grabbed the crystal goblet. It caught the arc of the ice water as it flew across the table and smashed into my face. "Wake up, old man," Preston's voice on the recording was crisp and clear. Jameson paused the video on the frame where the water was hitting my skin, where I sat humiliated and dripping while strangers looked on. "This," Jameson said, pointing to the freeze frame, "is abuse. It is assault. It is public humiliation. It is a violation of human dignity as defined by the Beatrice Clause." Preston stared at the screen. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. That was taken out of context," Preston stammered. "It was a joke." "We were joking." Jameson closed the laptop. "The trust administrator does not find it funny, Preston. And neither did your father." Jameson pulled another document from the file. "Because of this documented act of abuse, the Beatrice Clause has been triggered. Effective immediately, the entirety of the Thorne family trust, valued at approximately $8.2 million, has been transferred." "Transferred," Preston whispered. "To who?" "To the Beatrice Thorne Foundation for Elder Protection," Jameson said. "A charity your father established this morning. The money is gone, Preston. It's doing good work now. It's protecting old men from ungrateful sons." "No." Preston gasped. "No. That's $8 million. You can't just give it away." "It's already done," Jameson said. "The wire cleared an hour ago. You get nothing. Zero." Preston stood up, his chair tipping over. I'll sue you for malpractice. I'll sue him for fraud. Sit down," Jameson barked. The authority in his voice made Preston collapse back into the chair. "We aren't finished." "There's more." Preston asked, his voice barely a squeak. "We discussed the assets," Jameson said. "Now we must discuss the liabilities." Jameson pulled out a bank statement. It was the home equity line of credit Preston had taken out. The one with the forged signature. $150,000 of debt. "You took out this loan against the house," Jameson said. "You forged Harry's signature." Preston wiped sweat from his forehead. "Dad knows about that. He verbally authorized it. He'll pay it off. He always pays it off." "Harry didn't pay it off," Jameson said. "Harry reported it." "Reported it." This morning before he left, Harry filed a fraud affidavit with the bank. He swore under penalty of perjury that he did not sign this document. He provided the bank with handwriting samples and the video footage of you admitting to Tiffany that you signed it. Preston's eyes went wide. "The bank has opened an investigation," Jameson continued. "They have frozen the line of credit. And since the collateral, the house was sold this morning to a cash buyer." "Sold," Preston choked. "Sold," Jameson confirmed. "The proceeds from the sale cover the original mortgage. But they do not cover your fraudulent loan. The bank is not looking to the house for repayment anymore, Preston. They are looking to the person who committed the fraud." Jameson leaned forward. "That's you. You owe the bank $150,000, Preston. And since it was obtained through fraud, it is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. You will owe that money for the rest of your life until every penny is paid." Preston looked at his hands. He was shaking uncontrollably. "But I don't have it," he whispered. "I don't have anything." "I know," Jameson said. "And here is the final piece of news. Since the amount exceeds $100,000, the bank has referred the matter to the district attorney. It's grand larceny and bank fraud. Federal crimes." Preston put his head in his hands. He started to sob. It was the same pathetic sound he had made the night before, but this time there was no audience to pity him. My dad, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't send me to jail. Your father isn't sending you to jail, Preston, Jameson said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. You sent yourself to jail the moment you threw that water. Your father just stopped protecting you from the consequences. Jameson walked to the door and held it open. You should leave now, Preston. The police are likely looking for you at your motel to question you about the fraud. I wouldn't want you to be late. Preston stood up. He walked out of the office like a zombie. He didn't look back. He walked into the elevator and disappeared. Jameson called me 10 minutes later. It's done, Harry, he said. He knows. He knows everything. How did he take it? I asked. I was at the airport lounge watching my plane taxi to the gate. He cried, Jameson said. He realized the money is gone. He realized the debt is his, and he knows the DA is coming. Thank you, Jameson, I said. Safe travels, my friend. Send me a postcard from Italy. I hung up the phone. I took the SIM card out of the burner phone and snapped it in half. I dropped the pieces into a trash can. The announcer called for boarding. First class to Rome. I picked up my passport. I didn't look back at the city. There was nothing there for me anymore. My son was facing prison and poverty. My house was sold. My fortune was safe in a charity that honored the woman who would have been heartbroken to see what her son had become. But I wasn't heartbroken. I was free. I walked down the jet bridge. The future was waiting, and it looked delicious. The black sedan glided to a halt at the curbside check-in of JFK Terminal 4. I didn't step out immediately. I sat in the quiet cool of the back seat, looking through the tinted window at the chaos of the departure lane. People were hugging. People were crying. Families were saying goodbye for a semester abroad or a military deployment. They were holding on to each other, desperate to delay the moment of separation. I felt none of that. I felt the specific sterile calm of a surgeon who has just finished a 12-hour operation. The patient my life had survived, but the tumor had been removed. It was a massive malignant growth shaped like my son, and cutting it out had taken every ounce of strength I possessed. But now the incision was closed. The recovery could begin. I opened the door. The noise of the airport rushed in jet engines, car horns, the shouting of skycaps. I stepped onto the pavement. I had one suitcase. It was the same beat-up leather bag I had carried out of my basement room. It contained my clothes, my documents, and the photo of Beatrice I had taken from the frame. I left the rest. The furniture, the cars, the accolades, the social standing in Westchester. It was all weight. And I was done carrying weight. Driver, I said, handing him a tip that would cover his gas for the week. Keep the change. He drove off, merging back into the stream of traffic heading toward the city. I didn't watch him go. I turned my back on New York. I turned my back on the skyline where I had made my fortune and lost my family. I walked up to the first-class counter. The agent smiled, the professional, bright smile of someone who recognizes status. Checking in for Rome, Mr. Thorne, she asked. One way, I said. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She looked at me, perhaps sensing the finality in my voice. Do you have a return date in mind? I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one in years. No, I don't. She printed the boarding pass. It was a heavy piece of cardstock with gold lettering. Seat 1A. I took it. But before I went to security, I had one last piece of business to conclude. I had dismantled Preston. I had stripped him of his shelter and his funds. But I hadn't dealt with Tiffany. Tiffany was a predator, yes. But she was a predator who had attached herself to a weak host. Without my money, Preston was useless to her. She would eat him alive within a week. And while part of me wanted to watch that spectacle, another part of me, the part that remembered the logistics manager who solved problems before they happened, knew that true destruction required isolation. I needed Preston to be completely, utterly alone. I needed to strip away even the toxic comfort of his co-conspirator. I walked to the courier service desk located near the entrance. I pulled a thick white envelope from my briefcase. I had prepared it in the hotel room while waiting for the car. I placed it on the counter. Overnight delivery, I told the clerk. Local address. It needs to get there by tomorrow morning. The clerk weighed it. Who is the recipient? Mrs. Tiffany Thorne, I said. At the Sunset Motel Room 14. It was the cheap motel where the sheriff had dumped them. I knew they were there because I had tracked Preston's phone one last time before disconnecting the service. Inside that envelope was not money. It was an exit strategy. I had called a favor from a junior associate at Jameson's firm. He had drafted a standard no-fault divorce petition. It was prepaid. All Tiffany had to do was sign it and file it. It was the easiest divorce she would ever get. Paper-clipped to the divorce papers was a printed flight itinerary. It wasn't first class. It was Spirit Airlines. Economy. Middle seat. A one-way ticket departing tomorrow afternoon from LaGuardia to Dayton, Ohio. Ohio was where Tiffany came from. It was the place she had spent 10 years trying to escape, the place she swore she was too good for. Sending her back there wasn't charity. It was a reset button. It was sending her back to the starting line of the race she thought she had already won. And finally taped to the ticket was a single $100 bill. I took a pen from the counter and wrote a note on the back of the envelope. This $100 is for the baggage fee. The ticket is for your future. The divorce papers are for your survival. You can stay with a broke man who is facing federal charges, or you can go home and find a new mark. Don't waste this opportunity. I paid the clerk. I watched him slap the tracking sticker on the envelope. I watched it disappear into the bin. It was done. When Tiffany opened that envelope, she wouldn't hesitate. I knew her. She was a rat, and rats always flee a sinking ship. She would take the ticket. She would take the $100. She would leave Preston alone in that motel room with nothing but his debt and his silence. I walked toward the security checkpoint. I put my briefcase on the belt. I took off my shoes. I walked through the scanner. I stepped out on the other side. I was sterile. I was cleared. I walked through the terminal toward the lounge. I passed the duty-free shops filled with the same expensive garbage Tiffany used to covet. I passed the newsstand. The headlines were about politics and war's noise that didn't concern me anymore. I found a seat by the window in the lounge. I ordered a glass of sparkling water. I looked out at the tarmac. The giant metal birds were lined up waiting to leap into the sky. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo of Beatrice. I looked at her face. She had wanted this trip. We had planned it for our 40th anniversary. We were going to rent a villa in Tuscany. We were going to take cooking classes. We were going to grow old drinking wine in the sun. She died before we could go. She died thinking our son was a good man who just needed a little help. She died with hope. I was going for both of us now, but I wasn't going with hope. I was going with certainty. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass of the window. I saw an old man, yes, but I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. The boarding call came over the intercom. Flight 802 to Rome. I stood up. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't check my messages. I knew what was happening in New York. The DA was building a case. The bank was freezing assets. The motel room was becoming a pressure cooker. I walked down the jet bridge. The air changed. It smelled of recycled oxygen and aviation fuel. It smelled of transition. I found my seat. 1A, I stowed my bag. The flight attendant offered me a glass of champagne. To a special occasion, she asked, noticing my demeanor. I took the glass. I held it up to the light. The bubbles rose to the surface, frantic and bright. "To a new beginning," I said. She smiled and walked away. I looked out the window as the plane began to taxi. The city of New York rose in the distance, a jagged jaw of concrete teeth. Somewhere in that city, my son was waking up to a nightmare of his own making. The engines roared. The plane accelerated. The force pressed me back into the seat. It was a heavy pressure, but it felt good. It felt like propulsion. We lifted off. The ground fell away. The cars became toys. The houses became dots. The problems became invisible. I took a sip of the champagne. It was cold and dry. "Goodbye, Preston," I whispered. I closed my eyes. I wasn't Harry anymore. I wasn't the father. I wasn't the ATM. I was a ghost. And Italy was waiting to bring me back to life. The light in Tuscany is different from the light in New York. In New York, the sun is hard. It reflects off steel and glass, blinding you, demanding your attention. Here in the rolling hills of Val d'Orcia, the light is soft. It feels like a warm hand resting on your shoulder. It turns the vineyards into sheets of gold and makes the stone walls of my villa glow with an inner heat. I sat on the terrace, a glass of Brunello di Montalcino in my hand. The wine was a deep ruby red, smelling of cherries and earth. It was a far cry from the tap water I used to drink in the basement storage room. I looked at my hands resting on the wrought iron table. The tremors were gone. The pale, paper-thin skin of a man living in the dark had been replaced by a healthy tan. I had gained weight not from stress eating, but from pasta made by hand and olive oil pressed from the trees I could see from my balcony. I wasn't Harold the Burden anymore. Here I was, Signor Harry. A truck rumbled up the gravel driveway. It was Marco, my neighbor. He owned the vineyard next door. He didn't care about my bank account. He cared that I knew how to prune an olive tree, a skill I had picked up in my first month here. He jumped out of the truck, holding a basket of fresh figs. "Harry," he shouted, his voice booming across the yard. "You are too skinny. My wife says you must eat." He placed the basket on the table and poured himself a glass of my wine without asking. That was the difference. In Westchester, people took from me because they felt entitled. Here we shared because we were neighbors. There was no transaction. There was only life. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun begin its slow descent behind the cypress trees. It was a comfortable silence. I didn't have to apologize for taking up space. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't the frantic vibration of a son demanding money. It was a soft chime. I picked it up. It was an email from Jameson. Subject: Final Disposition, Thorn vs. Thorn. I hadn't thought about Preston in weeks. It was strange how quickly the monster in the closet shrinks when you turn on the lights and leave the house. I opened the email. Jameson was thorough as always. He didn't just send legal jargon. He sent a narrative. He knew I needed closure. "Harry," the email began. "I thought you would want to know that the dust has finally settled. The district attorney accepted a plea bargain this morning." I scrolled down. Preston had avoided federal prison barely. The fraud charge for the home equity line was heavy, but because the bank had recovered most of its loss through the sale of the house, they were lenient. They didn't want to spend tax dollars housing a non-violent idiot. Instead, they gave him 5 years of probation and a restitution order that would follow him to the grave. He owes the bank $150,000, plus interest, plus legal fees. But the part that made me pause, the part that felt like the universe correcting a cosmic imbalance, was his current employment status. Part of his probation required gainful employment. But with a fraud conviction on his record, no bank, no logistics firm, and no crypto startup would touch him. He had been blacklisted from the white-collar world he so desperately wanted to rule. So Preston was working. Jameson had attached a photo taken by the private investigator who was doing one final sweep. It was a grainy shot of a car wash in Queens. Not a fancy detailing shop, but a roadside place where road salt and city grime came to die. In the center of the frame, wearing a soggy blue jumpsuit and holding a high-pressure hose, was my son. He was scrubbing the rims of a Mercedes S-Class. I zoomed in on his face. He looked older. The arrogance had been power-washed away, leaving behind a hollow, exhausted resentment. He was surrounded by the luxury cars he used to lease, touching them, cleaning them for other men, but never driving them. It was a poetic sentence. He was trapped in the proximity of wealth, forever separated from it by a pane of glass he had to polish. He was living paycheck to paycheck. He was taking the bus. He was eating what he could afford. He was finally learning the lesson I should have taught him 20 years ago. Survival. And Tiffany Jameson had a paragraph for her too. She hadn't gone to Ohio. She had taken the $100 and the plane ticket, but she had cashed in the ticket for store credit and stayed in the city for as long as she could. She had divorced Preston in record time, citing financial incompatibility, which was a polite way of saying he was broke. She wasn't destitute, though. Tiffany was a survivor, like a cockroach is a survivor. Jameson reported that she had been seen on the arm of a new man, a guy who ran a shady precious metals scheme out of a boiler room in New Jersey. She was wearing fake designer clothes again, drinking cheap champagne that she pretended was expensive, and posting photos of a life she didn't own. She hadn't learned a thing. She was just repeating the cycle. She would bleed this new guy dry, and when the inevitable crash came, she would find another host. She was trapped in a prison of her own, making a treadmill of envy and pretense that she would never step off. I put the phone down. Marco looked at me. "Bad news?" he asked. "No," I said. "Old news." I looked out at the vineyard. I thought about the man I was a year ago. The man who sat at the end of the table afraid to ask for bread. I thought about the water hitting my face. It felt like a different lifetime. It felt like a story someone else had lived. I wasn't angry at Preston anymore. Hate takes energy. Hate requires you to hold on to the hot coal, hoping to throw it at someone else. I had dropped the coal a long time ago. I felt a profound, quiet indifference. Preston was scrubbing tires. Tiffany was faking a smile in New Jersey. And I was here. I picked up the fig Marco had brought. It was sweet, soft, and perfect. I remembered Beatrice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small photo I still carried. She would have been sad, I knew. No mother wants to see her son fall so low, but she would have been proud of me. She would have been proud that I didn't let them break me. She would have been proud that I finally stood up. I looked at the sunset. The sky was a bruised purple fading into the deep blue of the coming night. The first stars were appearing. I raised my glass toward the horizon. To Beatrice I whispered. And then I raised it again, higher this time, toward the west, toward the ocean, toward the past I had left behind. And to Preston I said softly, "Thank you." Marco looked confused. "You thank him?" "Yes," I said. "If he hadn't thrown that water, I might have died in that house. I might have let them bury me alive. He woke me up. He gave me the greatest gift a son can give a father." "What is that?" Marco asked. "Freedom," I said. I took a sip of the wine. It was the best glass I had ever tasted. The air grew cooler. The crickets began to sing in the tall grass. Tomorrow I had a cooking class in the village. Next week I was going to visit the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. I had years ahead of me. Good years. My own years. I picked up the phone one last time. I opened the email from Jameson and hit delete. I didn't need the record. I didn't need the proof. I watched the digital trash can swallow the files. Preston Thorne was gone. I turned to Marco. Stay for dinner, I asked. I'm making risotto. He smiled. Only if you use my oil, deal. We laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and resonant. The screen of my life didn't fade to black. It faded to gold. The warm, enduring gold of a Tuscan evening. I was Harold Thorne. I was 70 years old, and my life was just beginning. Looking back from this terrace in Tuscany, I realized the hardest lesson wasn't about finance but self-worth. We spend decades building safety nets for our children, mistaking endless sacrifice for love. But when that love becomes a one-way street paved with disrespect, it is no longer family, it is extortion. I learned that you cannot save someone who views you only as a resource to be harvested. True family isn't defined by DNA, but by mutual respect and kindness. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is cut the cord, let them fall, and finally start living for yourself. It is never too late to rewrite your ending. If you believe that respect is non-negotiable, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to find your peace? Let me know your story in the comments below.